Hatfield. Okay. Go ahead.
Now we're good.
Got it. How you guys doing? Hi, Tom. I'm Nikki Hatfield. I'm the Black Student Union president. Happy to be in conversation with you today. And I'm going to hand it over to Kier.
Hi, Tom. My name is Kier Wilson, and I'm the vice president of the BSU.
And I'm Trillia Hargrove, and I'm a member of the BSU, and I'm going to be co-facilitator with Nikki Hatfield. And if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh.
Sure. I'm Tom Temprano. I am the vice president of the College Board. Been on the board since 2016, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you all.
Awesome. All right, so just a little context about why we're having this conversation, why we're doing these Q&A sessions. So Black Student Union has been advocating for just structural changes and sustainability of our programs. And we feel a little pushed to the side, we feel marginalized, and we just want to have these conversations, but not only just conversation with potential trustees, but action in regards to the conversations and the rhetoric of Students First, right? Yep. So you're an incumbent, you have been on the board, you know, it's likely that you will get your seat back again. So we're really interested in like what you can commit to as far as, you know, Black quality of life on campus and the validity of some of our demands that we're going to be asking about today. So starting off with our first question, what's something you believed in? You got this question ahead of time, right?
I did. It was a really good question. It was like a great thinking prompt.
Awesome. So the question is, what's something you believed earlier in your career, but think about differently now?
You know, I really did think about it, and I was sort of thinking of these kind of like small granular examples of like, oh, I was like here on an issue, and then I had a bunch of conversations and I moved. But then I kind of got back to more of like this philosophical like life, you know, if you look at sort of activism and political service as kind of, you know, I guess I've only recently been actually paid to do it, but it's kind of what I've always found myself just doing organically since I was like in high school. It's why I moved to San Francisco, just to be a part of. I started as, you know, I think I for a very long time worked extra institutionally. Like I believed that like activism and change, like I wouldn't be able to be an effective agent for change inside of institutions, and that it was really necessary for me to push kind of outside and externally. And I did that for years and years and years and years and years and years, and actually did that back in like 2013 as part of the fight to save City College, and like joined the Save City College Coalition, and, you know, yelled at a lot of elected officials about how they need to do better and to need to fight for city and fight to make sure we would, you know, exist for students. And obviously the clear evolution from that, as you said, like I'm an incumbent now. I clearly thought I could try to be effective in actually facilitating and advocating for change inside of institutions as like a part, as like a governing board of an entity and a body. And I think for me, that's been like a really, it was like a personal evolution to get to this place of like, oh, I think I could actually go from being outside of this thing and you know, pressing for change to being inside of it and trying to actually be a part of that change. And I think honestly, like I've been pretty, you know, I feel like I've been challenged by how difficult it is, even in a position of leadership in a large organization like City College, to actually be able to even affect change on some really granular issues. You know, the state chancellor's office stops us from doing things, and we have all these processes that we have to follow. And I think honestly, it's been a little bit of a challenge reconciling that sort of past experience and where I came from and how I viewed myself and operated as an activist, and how I've had to sort of adapt to trying to do that within some very rigid confines of what a single trustee on the board of trustees or even a board of trustees can do. But that was, like I said, I was like, I have like micro examples and like little things, but I think just larger, like that's kind of honestly for me, more of like this large, difficult evolution that I feel like I'm learning more in doing every day.
Awesome. Thank you for that honest answer. I can totally relate. So going into our question 2, Trill.
Yeah, this is question 2, and just as setting some ground rules, like we have about an hour, so maybe keep the answers to around 5 minutes or so. But that was a really good answer to the first question, so thank you. So number 2, do you have a background in educational equity? And if so, please tell us what that is.
I mean, I didn't, as I said, I kind of came into City College not as like an academic and an educator, but more of an activist who'd worked, I was a community college student when I was growing up. Like I grew up in Southern California, and then I came to San Francisco because of this sort of like I had read about and seen it as this place of real activism, but I didn't have that sort of educational background and even educational advocacy background. I was just this like activist. And so I think in terms of educational equity, I've been pretty, I think joining the board at City College was a crash course in just how poor of a job not only City College does in ensuring equitable distribution of resources and certainly equitable outcomes and equitable hiring. And all of these areas that I think are related to equity, where I think we continue to miss the mark. And so I've had to learn about that. And I've on it, like, I think because I didn't have that, ed policy deep background, I was shocked. Like I've gotten in trouble for saying at board meetings that it's shameful that we have such, low hiring numbers of Black and brown faculty. And it is shameful. And it's not something, it's weird for me that it's like somehow inappropriate for me to call stuff like that out. But I think I felt like I had to because I was so shocked. I'm like, how are our numbers this low? This is insane. Like, what are like, and then of course you hear because this is how hiring committees are structured and we have these legal process and like and it's just like, I guess because I didn't have a policy background and hadn't had the sort of, I guess, deep experiencing and realizing just how bad City College is and public higher education is in general in dealing with equity issues and supporting students of color and hiring faculty of color. It's been really shocking and disturbing. And, I guess that's sort of the extent of I guess the question was, what's my background? And my background is the last, 4 years of being really surprised at just how far we had to go to actually improve equity, at City College, period. Like it's been seeing it firsthand and being kind of shocked at how we got here and upset at where our level is and trying, hopefully being able to work with you to get us to a much better place.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And that's exactly what we want. We definitely want a seat at the table, right? Especially when it comes to the transparency of how we can be more serviced, supported. Going into our question 3, what is your strategy to rectify the harm in education in regards to Black students? So for context, we're talking about bad policy, underrepresentation, like you talked about with the lack of diversity in the faculty, and underfunded programs.
Yeah. Well, I think that, first there needs to continue to be a lot of changes at the state level. Like I feel that AB 705 was like a major step in the right direction, like theoretical step in the right direction, that now it's up to, City College to be able to implement effectively. And I think similarly at the state level, like we sort of have, we really depend on the state and federal government and local property taxes, but really it's like the state for so much of our funding. And I think to really, I think, so for instance, there's to me, the student success funding model is kind of an example of like, I believe that at its core, the idea that we need to be I wouldn't say prioritizing resources, but we need to be focusing on degree and certificate completion and those other things. And in particular, closing equity and achievement gaps. Like, I think, yes, I don't quite agree that we should be deprioritizing other things. And I think that my frustration is that I feel like the state should be rewarding and expanding and providing additional support resources to achieve that, versus sort of like taking money away from other programs, which is kind of what we potentially have with that funding formula now. I think that said, like, we do live in a really wealthy city, and, you know, prior to COVID-19 decimating our college's budget, obviously, and I do a lot of work around our city budget, and which just was not fun this year. But prior to that, I had been working, you know, with students and with faculty and with folks in City Hall around this idea of local funding for City College. And one of the core things for, you know, that I heard from students who are at the table there, but also just kind of inherently knew, is that, like, we can't just use that funding to stabilize. Like, if we have a chance, if we're getting any additional money for anything, I believe we should be getting additional money to provide additional support services and resources and wraparound services to Black students, to brown students, to undocumented students, to students with disabilities. You know, I like continue to better fund our Queer Resource Center. Like, you know, I think that to me, actually, one of the things that I had said when we were talking about, like, what needs to be in this proposal, which became WRF, which now we're sort of, we're still pushing forward, but was really, I think, sidelined by the budget, but we shouldn't stop it, was the idea that, you know, it's like I always hear, I hear from you, I hear from students at the Queer Resource Center, like, our student resource centers are chronically underfunded, and we basically depend on our students to fund our student resource centers, which isn't right. Like, that shouldn't be the case. And so one of the things that I was really hoping we would get out of the WRF proposal was actual funding from the city for student resource centers, like real meaningful funding, so we're not just depending on student fees to provide students resources. I don't think that's right. So I think, to get back to the question, I think it's about sort of continuing to fight, you know, at the state level for these sort of larger policy changes, which to me feels like a little bit like a cop-out. Like, we need to do what we can do. And so in addition to doing that, I think it's about, like, we need, like, the way we deal with this, honestly, in a college that has the budget situation we do, is we need more money, and we need to fight for more money. And that money needs to go to student services, to our resource centers, to supporting programs that help, you know, support our margin, I guess, I don't like marginalized, but students who continue to face these real disparities in outcomes and access at City College.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And just out of what you just said, it makes me think about, like, money, and how, like, sometimes I look at the budget and I see a lot of money, and how, what if we're able to have a student on, like, some type of oversight committee where there's that budget and spending transparency. It's like a student leader such as myself, and then when I transfer, we reinstate someone that's like, you're the student around budget and spending transparency, right? And that could really bridge the gap between, you know, the disconnect that we see, right? Going into our next question though, Trill, you go ahead.
And thank you for that answer, Tom. So number 4, are you familiar with or aware of the Affirmative Action Taskforce and their mission to instate a full-time faculty member in the African American Studies Department?
Yes, I met with the Affirmative Action Taskforce a couple months, sort of like time has blended together over the last 6 months, but maybe it was a couple months ago, and, you know, thought that that demand was really reasonable. And it's another one of those things that I think, to someone, again, who doesn't have a background, like, I don't have that background in higher ed policy. I don't understand why our systems are set up in a way that makes a request that simple, you know, whether, you know, because of our labor and employment issues, like all these things that make that ask seem so difficult didn't seem to make sense to me. I'm like, why can't we hire a full-time like what? Why? Just hire a full-time person. But yes, I have met with the Affirmative Action Task Force and think those demands are reasonable. And I know I've brought that to our current. I guess it must have been our previous. Must have been before Dr. Verdian was hired, because I brought it to Interim Chancellor Gonzalez and have also discussed it with Chancellor Verdian as like, let's figure it out. Let's figure it out.
Okay, awesome. I'm happy we got that support. Going into our fifth question, have you taken any classes in African American studies?
I have not taken any classes in African American studies at City College, so I should probably get myself enrolled in a class for what are we in now? For spring. I did, so I went to SF State. I was a political science major, and I don't remember, like, it was a little while ago, honestly, but I took many ethnic studies and LGBTQ and women's studies courses at SF State, and that was kind of one of the things that, you know, made me, I enrolled as I enrolled as a drama major. I was a theater kid. I thought I was just gonna, you know, light up the stage, but I started taking ethnic studies courses at State and just was like, I don't know, like, I feel like my calling is here. I feel like my calling is more oriented towards like organizing and justice. So I guess the answer is not at City, but I need to. But I did take, you know, a lot of ethnic studies, and also I'm really glad that that's now finally ethnic studies and social justice studies are required courses at Cal State. Is amazing. Should have been a long time ago, back when I was a student at State.
Thank you.
Yeah, it definitely is an accomplishment with the requirement now. So for number 6, can you identify funds in the school budget meant for Black students? If so, tell us the type of fund and how to access it. So this could be allocations of funds in the budget meant for Black students, Black programs, or this could be scholarships, because sometimes we don't know about these things because of lack of visibility. So we're here to share the knowledge. And if you know about any scholarships that would be good to shout out, please do.
No, we do receive I know we have a number of categorical funds that are specifically for, I believe, supporting Blacks, you know, again, sort of closing that achievement gap with Black and Brown and API students. I don't actually know the names of scholarships offhand, but I wish I had gotten the question in advance, because I would have loved to have come with a sort of like laundry list of what we have. But I would very happily get that list and share it back with BSU, so that there's actually, it's not just me off the top of my head, it's me saying, here are the, you know, 20 different funds and scholarship options, because if that isn't something that you've been provided yet, that seems wrong, and you should be. So I'm taking notes here. I've got, you know, a student as part of budget transparency and oversight, and I'm going to add to it getting an exhaustive list of resources specifically for Black students and scholarships that are also available.
Yeah, but it's important to know that you know that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that would be great. A list would be wonderful. We could definitely share that with people. So thank you. And Nikki, now your turn.
All right. Well, going into question 7, can you tell us how much money is in the budget reserves, and would you use this money to support Black students, and if so, how?
God, I think so. We just had next year's budget, this current year's budget at Budget Committee 2 weeks ago. And so we have a required 5% reserve. Like, the state requires that. I think our general fund is around 200 million, it may be a little bit less this year. So I believe the reserve amount was the projected reserve amount is between 6 and 8 million. Unfortunately, in terms of we legally have to have that as a reserve that we can't use. Otherwise, we risk getting our accreditation revoked, which we can't do. But I feel like we should be able to offer at least the amount of services for Black and Brown students. So I don't know that we can spend the reserves on that, but that should be at least a dollar amount that we should be able to find, whether again it's through, whether it's grants, scholarships, other funds. Like that seems like a very reasonable, if not too low amount that we should actually be investing in our students. So I don't think we can spend the reserve on it, but we should be spending that on our students, at least that amount.
Do we still have more money than the reserve? Has the reserve been dipped into, as far as you know?
We got in trouble because our audit finding actually found that our reserve was actually below the 5% of actual sort of hard cash reserve that is required by the state. So I've heard, it always sort of astounds me at like some of our public meetings, people will say things like, you can just spend the reserves, it's fine. We fought the ACCJC and we won before. And I'm like, we fought the ACC, we won, but we are literally half the college we were when we started that fight. Like we have lost so much enrollment, like just because of that struggle, it has fundamentally changed the college. And so I do take that responsibility of making sure we don't get into that situation again seriously. Like I'm on our budget committee because I want to be on our administration to make sure they're holding that. So we were able, I think we've gotten like back with this budget to our 5%. I think we're budgeting like slightly over the minimum 5% because what has happened every year that I've been on the board is like, something breaks. It's like literally sometimes it's like something breaks that we didn't think would break and now we have to pay for that and we need the reserve. But I believe we're able to balance to 5% for last year, and we're budgeted at slightly over 5%, at least in our tentative budget for this year. So we're back, but it's like, it's precarious. We're closer than we should be.
I hear that.
Well, thank you. So for the next question, what is your strategy in regards to the Black Student Union demands? And that would be, I have a slide.
Sure,
I have a slide, so I will.
Oh, good. Okay.
I will bring up the slide.
I think I have them pulled up here too. I'll open them too.
Okay, cool. So, and this is the list that we've combined, or we've curated, I suppose, but it's not limited to this, and you can always find more. Oh my Lord, why? Okay. So I'll just read it out. We ask that CCSF understands our goals are to have a unified Black space and presence that connects all of the resource centers, AFAM studies departments, and Black Student Union, to networking with high schools so we can promote ourselves to potential CCSF students. This encourages longevity and circulation of students into the BSU so we can continue its legacy. 3, making sure that Black programs and resources are given the proper visibility at CCSF. 4, advocating for adequate funding for the African American Resource Center. And 5, an AFAM Studies Associates of Arts degree that can be used for transferring, which we currently do not have.
Awesome. I think these are amazing demands that should have. Oh, can you go back? Can I go through them? Can I go through point by point?
Oh yeah,
sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No. Yes.
If you want, I can read them because I know when we have the filming.
Okay.
Online.
It makes a weird screen. Okay.
Yeah, it just kind of fills it up.
Oh, sure. Well, then I can go through and just sort of speak about them. Then that's fine. I mean, I think absolutely, and I think so. I think it's important, and again, we were able to do this with the Queer Resource Center, and then COVID came immediately after the Queer Resource Center had its like new home, and so that sucked and was really disappointing. But it's like we need to put student resource centers into spaces where students actually want to be and can be like. It's like we shouldn't configure spaces for students in the way we think students want those spaces to exist. We should be asking those students who need those spaces what they want. So I think that the space demands and like having a place where, where we can have multiple organizations. I think I have here. Oh, here we go. Okay, I have these open. So where we could have the African American Resource Center, BSU.
I can bring it up again if you want.
Yeah, I think I've got at least some of them on a slide here, but I think that is totally reasonable. I think we should try to figure out temporarily how we can accommodate that when we get back to campus. But I think in a sort of larger sense, we do have funding for a new student support, new student services, and stuff. Like, we've actually funded in this new bond, like, new amazing buildings to house things like our student resource centers. And so I think as we're like talking about those projects and those designs, we need to have, like, this needs to be centered in that. So I really appreciate getting this now when we're in this sort of process of conceiving what these new buildings that these bond funds are going to be spent like, so that they can be designed in a way that students actually like want and will use and are asking for. In terms of networking with high schools, I love that idea. I saw it on the slide I was sent earlier, and I would actually, maybe this is a sidebar, but I have, a couple friends, colleagues who are on the Board of Education who I think would be really excited about like helping to build some of these connections between students in SFUSD high schools and BSU at City College. So maybe it's like maybe we could set up a Zoom like this where I could get a couple of Board of Ed members. Maybe they can recommend some student leaders in Unified who could be a part of the conversation. And I would love to help facilitate that connection in any way that I can be helpful with. So that would be amazing. And I also feel like one of the things that we've sort of had to scale back, like we spent all this money on marketing things and we kind of marketed this big idea of like City College and Free City and all this. And now we've had to sort of step away from the like actual spending of a lot of money on marketing. But I do think that as we get more resources and even as we sort of prioritize more grassroots outreach efforts, we don't like we've already marketed City College as a whole. We really need to be actually marketing specific programs and degrees, because I think frankly that's more exciting for students. They can it's like, do I imagine myself at this sort of nebulous City College, or do I imagine myself like taking classes in African American studies? Like, that seems more tangible to me and seems like what we should be doing anyway. And yes, I mentioned earlier I think I really want us to find not just kind of the sort of like subsistence level funding that City College has right now for resource centers, but like real, I want city investment, because I feel like student resource centers are actually an investment in like San Francisco residents and students, and should be providing all of these wraparound and support services. And so I know my colleague, President Williams, is a part of the larger discussions happening in the city about how we can take some of this police budget and actually invest in Black communities in San Francisco. And I know that she is really, trying to make sure that we draw the connection between like, we need to take some of that money and actually invest in Black students at City College. Like, that's just such a direct way to make that investment. So my hope is that even though the kind of larger Workforce Education Recovery Fund conversation is stalled, that at least as a part of that conversation, we can get some dedicated resources for Black students at City College. And then finally, yes, I love the idea of creating an Associate of Arts degree for transfer in African American Studies. I think for kind of all of our diversity studies program, like that, and you actually, this, which is why you brought it up. Like, usually people ask, like, what can we do to support? But it's like, what we can do to support is create degrees for transfer. Like, that incentivizes more students to take those classes, which helps us to grow those programs and create sustainability over time. So I strongly support that. And if it's not already in the works, I would love, I would hope that our administration, they've started to look at how to do more of that. But I will absolutely follow up and make sure that that's already being worked on, because that's a fantastic idea. It's what we should be doing.
Awesome. I appreciate you going through each and really being mindful and like thoughtful around like, how can we, complete these things, which lever to pull and things such as that. Mm-hmm. So going into our question number 9, what makes you different in this race?
Sure. I mean, I have to say, like, this is the third time I've run for a seat on the college board. I ran in 2015 and I lost. I ran in 2016 and it went well. and I'm running again. Who knows what's going to happen on November 3rd. But I am so impressed with this field of candidates. Like, it just like, we've had like every conversation we've had, endorsement meetings. I'm just like, I honestly feel like if I am lucky enough to be reelected, and I hope I am, pretty much any of the folks who are running would be amazing additions to the board. I feel like if I don't win, then the college is going to be in fine hands and we'll be okay. So I have to say, this is a really great field. And I think that it's sort of, you know, I've been trying to figure out like why it's so different than other fields that I've like run in before and even prior to my time on the board. But I just think that there's a lot of people who have the ability and want to give back to City College right now and really want to step up. And I think as someone, like, I just think that's really exciting. So I want to say that. I mean, I guess what makes me different in, you know, from all but one of the candidates is that I've actually done this job for 4 years now. I do think that we're in such an uncertain place. Like, I think that COVID-19 like, we were all, to be clear, pre-COVID, City College was already in a very uncertain place. Like, we have, you know, spent the last 4 years trying to kind of like stabilize from an attack on the institution, like an attack that was intended to destroy and remove this institution. And that has been painful and it's been really challenging, but we've been dealing with that. And then on top of that, we have like a global pandemic and the quickest economic collapse in like modern history, like bam, bam. It's just like, ugh. And I think it's gonna, I mean, I think that from a budgetary perspective, I think it's gonna get worse because of COVID. I think it's gonna, you know, as I've been telling people, like I was not the most excited about the prospect of President Biden, but we need at least some hope of what I feel like public education needs a bailout. I feel like the federal government needs to come in and do what they've done with the auto industry and the airline industry and the hotel industry, and they need to bail out public education. Like, you know, and to stop thinking of it as like, it's true though, because it's like we think about they're like, here's some little resources for you, like here's a few $1 million, and I'm like, we won't exist for our communities if you don't like it really needs to be a bailout. Like, if you want community colleges to be able to continue to offer classes, to be able to continue to employ people, to be able to exist, you need to bail us out, because we will not be able to do it without that level of resources. And it like, honestly, it's so frustrating that whenever a private industry feels like it's on the brink of this like collapse, there's these federal resources to like keep that private industry afloat. But when the entire system of public education in this country is on the brink of collapse, everyone's like, oh, the states will figure it out, or you can just like downsize and cut classes. Like, that's literally what we're told. And I don't know how I got off on this tangent, but it just gets me like really upset, because I'm just like, we need that level of and I think that part of it is like a desire to privatize public education. I think that is real, and that has been ongoing for decades. And I was just reading about like how Mike Bloomberg is spending millions of dollars on school board races in Oakland to like support charter schools. Like, it's so insane. So this is all to say that I think it's going to get worse from a budget perspective before it gets better. And I think we're going to need people on the board who already have been fighting for at the local, state, and federal level for this college and for funding for this college. And I have been doing that. I'm really committed to doing that. I think one of the things that has come up in this race, I work for a member of the Board of Supervisors. I work in City Hall. There's a whole lot of people actually running in this race that work in City Hall. But I think part of the advantage, and to be clear, when I first got elected to this board, I was a bartender. I was a bartender for my first 2 years on the board. And then I, started working in City Hall. So I take a little bit of issue with this, like, oh, he's just this insider. I'm like, I would disagree, but it's fine. But I do think that we need, and I believe I continue to bring to the table the ability to navigate that at a time when we're going to really need it. Like, we're going to need our board of supervisors and our mayor and our assembly members and our state senators and our governor. I don't have any connections with our future president, but, you know, degrees of separation, but we're going to need people that actually know those folks and will rally everyone together around City College and around this need to keep us whole, and then create the path for us to expand again. Like, we should be offering older adults class again. We should be doing all these things again, but we need people who actually know where to pull those levers and who to talk to and how to get that done. And I feel like I've done that fairly effectively. And I think we're really going to need people who are able to do that over the next 4 years. Sorry for the rant. I got totally off on my bailout of public education, but it needs to happen.
It was interesting because you talked about bailouts, and honestly, with all of these private industries or you know, the industries that you mentioned, the community college has classes in hospitality. They have classes in mechanics, car mechanics, and like, we are directly feeding into these industries, but they won't help us out.
Yeah. That's why we got to do our part. That's why we're doing this. This starts from local, just in your own communities, holding each other accountable. How can we be better? You know, might just be a conversation with someone that has direct influence on the college, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense. Going into our last question, I'm going to hand it over to Trillia.
So this is our last question. How are you committed to helping the African American Studies Department?
Sure. Well, thank you. This has been great. I actually, and you know, I do feel like what's so interesting, sorry, just to digress momentarily, I feel like so often we're oftentimes only asked to have these conversations when we're coming up to like a ballot. And that goes with, you know, students and folks at City College, but also with the larger community. And I've been kind of reflecting on that as like, oh, why do people only want to talk to us every 4 years? And I actually want to take some ownership of that and be like, I should be more active and actually going out and saying, hey, do you want to have a conversation? So one thing I'd really like to do is just, you know, I will be on time, but I would like to like continue to just meet. And even if it's not like, you know, it also, the other time people want to talk to us is when there's like a big issue. And what we don't do as regularly is just kind of like check in about where things are and, you know, hear about kind of it's like we communicate in crisis, but not in sort of regular just dialogue. And I would love to do that more regular. I don't want to, you know, assume any of your time, but if we could do this even more regularly, whether it's once a month, once every few months, once a semester, whatever works, I would love to just have more regular conversations and check-ins. So let me know how I can bug you to make that happen, so you don't have to come ask us. But I would really like to do this more. This is really, I think, you know, I'm learning about how I can be better and learning about, you know, what our students really are asking for and needing. So thank you.
Yeah.
So to the question about how I can support African American studies, I mean, I strongly support the need for a full-time faculty member. That should not be audacious. That should be a baseline. And the goal shouldn't be to just get one full-time faculty member. The goal should be to create that associate's degree for transfer. It basically should be to do everything you've asked for us to do, which is, you know, market the program better, create a degree for transfer that we can market, do a better job getting students from Unified aware of that degree as almost like a reason to come to City, and then continue to grow the program. So it's not just like we're like, there should be no satisfaction in one full-time faculty member. There should be satisfaction in this like robust degree program with many classes. And like, I want wait lists. Like I want to see this program really grow, and that takes, you know, investing in the program. So I would like to, you know, continue to work with you on ways you think that as a trustee, I could be doing that. And you've already given me some really good ones, but I think we need to not be satisfied with like stabilizing. We really need to push to grow the department.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering that question.
Yeah.
And for your time today. Is there anything else you would like to add as we conclude?
No, I appreciate, you're pulling all of us who are running to represent you together. And, I really appreciated this conversation. I hope we can have more regular conversations. And also, I'm excited about my list of to-dos. So.
Awesome. Awesome.
Wonderful.
Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you
Well,
so
I
much.
will see you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Tom.
All
Bye.
right. Thank you so much.